Chuck Nolan is a systems analyst executive for Federal Express, who travels the world resolving productivity problems at FedEx depots. He explains that the most important thing is time, that the package sorting must be completed precisely on schedule. To prove it, he opens a package he sent to himself from his home Memphis, Tennessee, that contains a small timer. Chuck stops it at 87 hours, and reveals that it is a shameful performance that it took that long to deliver the package from his home to this FedEx depot in Russia. While yelling at the staff, the translator brings up a past incident where Chuck stole a kid's bike when his delivery vehicle broke down. Chuck insists that the story has been hyperbolized and that he merely borrowed the bike and that he still got his deliveries done. Chuck gets word that one of the Moscow office's trucks is booted in Red Square. He then sent 2 other trucks and carried out the package sorting from that booted truck to the other 2 in the street. After the sort is done, he's back at the airport and ready to go home. Chuck returns to Memphis, FedEx headquarters, and visits Kelly, his girlfriend. During dinner with her family on Christmas Eve, he gets a message that he needs to go to Malaysia. They drive to his departure point at the airport and they exchange their Christmas gifts. He gives her a bunch of kitchen items. She gives him an antique watch that belonged to her grandfather. Inside the lid is a picture of her. Chuck is quite taken with the watch and promises her he'll always keep it set to Memphis time to remind him to come home. Right before he leaves for his plane, he gives her a small ring box and reveals his plan to propose to her on New Year's Eve. He tells her he'll be right back and board the plane. On the plane, Chuck wakes up when the plane bumps in some turbulence. The plane has encountered a fierce storm. The pilots attempt to fly around it, but they've fallen out of radio contact. Chuck goes to the bathroom to freshen up a bit. Suddenly the door flies open and Chuck is nearly sucked out of the plane. One of the crew helps him and gets him back to his seat. He is also given a life raft by the crew. The plane goes straight down and crashes in the ocean. Water rushes into the plane in a flash. Chuck makes it to the surface and climbs in the raft, seeing one of the engines explode. Chuck passes out and is washed onto the shore of a very small tropical island. He discovers immediately that his pager is waterlogged and that Kelly's watch is equally ruined. He also finds out very quickly that he's alone. He makes a help sign on the sand, but the next day he realizes it is washed away by the waves, so he upgrades it with some coconut logs that he can find. Desperate to find food and fresh water, Chuck spends a lengthy time trying to open a coconut. He tries throwing them at a large rock and smashing them on a smaller rock. As the small rock breaks, it becomes sharp and he uses it to finally cut the outer shell. But the coconut water splashes after he tries to open the shell by smashing it on a rock. He then revises his way and is finally able to open a coconut shell. He explores the island, finding a small cave in the rock and finds a total of 11 FedEx packages from the crash that have washed ashore. Going to the highest point of the island, he sees something on the shore and discovers the body of one of the aircraft's pilots. After taking his shoes and tools, he buries him. At night on the beach, Chuck sees the lights of a ship. Using a small flashlight he recovered from the body of the pilot, he tries to signal the ship but is unsuccessful. The next morning he attempts to leave the island with a life raft. The high waves over the coral reef surrounding the island turn the raft over. He's tossed onto the reef and his thigh is badly lacerated. Recovering from the accident, he begins to build a simple camp and opens the FedEx parcels. He discovers several items that aid him in his survival, including a pair of ice skates, a leather and lace dress, videotapes and a legal document declaring a divorce. And another parcel contains a volleyball. One of the parcels is decorated with a pair of wings and for unexplained reasons he doesn't open it. He uses the ice skates to open coconuts and makes a fishing net from the lace, but he is only able to capture small fish. He then sharpens a wooden stick and pierces a crab with it, but realizes that it can't be eaten raw. He then tries hard until the next day to make a fire. But in the end, his hand slips and he gets his hand cut by the wood. In a fury, he grabs the volleyball and throws it. His cut hand leaves a bloody imprint on the ball and from that he adds in a face, naming it by its brand name, Wilson. The ball becomes his companion. He then continues to spend a lengthy amount of time rubbing 2 sticks together to build a fire. The process is frustrating but Chuck perseveres, refining his technique and finally gets a fire going. He is very thrilled by the fire he made and celebrates his achievement. Sometime later he describes to Wilson the flight path of his jet compared to its last known position and calculates that the search area is over 500,000 square miles, which is twice the size of Texas, and he realizes it's doubtful that he'll ever be found. Suffering from the tooth that keeps bothering him, he checks his tooth's condition using the reflection from the ice skate. Desperate, he finally resorts to using the sharp end of the ice skate blade, helped with a rock as a hammer, and extracts the tooth. 4 years have passed. Chuck has lost weight and his hair and beard are long and unkempt. He survives from day to day. During a storm, 2 of the walls of a broken fiberglass portable toilet are tossed on shore. When he sees it blown by the wind, he is suddenly energized with the idea of building a raft that will use the fiberglass walls as a sail that could possibly get him over the larger waves surrounding the island. He chops down trees and lays out his raft. To tie the poles together, He braids rope from local tree bark and from the videotape. He counts the days necessary to catch the northeast trade winds that he hopes will take him into the shipping lanes and gets rescued. Chuck isn't certain where he is headed but figures that he would rather die at sea than spend the rest of his life alone on the island. When he finishes scouring the island and cuts down every sapling he can, he tells Wilson he'll have to make the rest of the rope using the videotape, which won't be as strong as the tree bark. When Wilson suggests where Chuck can get more rope, Chuck becomes very reluctant. The extra rope was a length Chuck had made when he was contemplating suicide a few years before. Chuck climbs to the top of the island's peak and retrieves the rope, which he'd tied to a dummy of himself to test it. At one point he imagines that Wilson is telling him the plan won't work and he kicks Wilson out of his cave. Immediately remorseful, Chuck runs outside and finds Wilson, apologizing to him. Chuck writes his will to a rock and then ties his friend Wilson to the raft. With the new sail, he is finally able to sail over the reef surf and escape the island. He sails for many days and encounters a few storms. One day, following a heavy storm, an exhausted Chuck is awakened by water in his face that is spouted out of a whale. He can't find Wilson and then sees Wilson floating away. He tries to rescue Wilson but, afraid of losing the raft, he is forced to let Wilson go. He has nearly given up hope of rescue when he is woken by another whale spout. He turns over to see a container ship passing close by, and they signal that they've seen him. Soon, Kelly receives a call informing her that Chuck is alive and has been found. She is so shocked and passes out. A month later, Chuck is flown home to Memphis and his friend tells him that they thought he was dead, that they have held a funeral for him, with a coffin containing stuff all his friends each put in. Chuck is invited as the guest of honor at a FedEx to celebrate his survival through the incident. There he meets with Kelly's husband, who introduces himself as also an orthodontist who did dental work on Chuck 5 years ago. He mentions that Kelly intended to meet Chuck at the celebration, but she is currently feeling very confused and having a difficult time coping with everything that is happening. He asks Chuck to give her more time. Looking out of the window he sees Kelly in tears, comforted by her husband, and watches her get in a car and leave. Later that evening, Chuck takes a taxi to Kelly's home. She seems to be expecting him and invites him inside. They talk about little things and he discovers how much her life and ambitions have changed and how she coped with his presumed death. Chuck gives Kelly back the watch she had given him, telling her that it is a family heirloom and should remain in her family. She tells him that the company presumed a hazardous package caught fire and caused the crash. She shows him that his island was more than 600 miles from the nearest habited island which the search had been conducted. When Chuck tries to leave, Kelly gives him the keys to his Jeep which she had kept. As Chuck rides away with his Jeep, Kelly suddenly runs after him, shouting his name. He backs up and they embrace fiercely in the pouring rain. She tells him that she always believed he was alive, but that others said she had to move on. She tells him that he's the love of her life. He says he loves her too, but in the end they agree to respect and live with the new life they now each have. He drives to Texas with the FedEx package decorated with wings in his Jeep and delivers the 4 years late package to the owner. When he drives back, he finds himself at a four-way intersection and gets out of his car to look at a map. A friendly young woman in an old pickup truck stops and tells him that he looks lost. Asking him where he is headed, Chuck smiles and confesses he hasn't made up his mind where he was going. She tells him where the 4 roads lead to. She drives north and as she pulls away, Chuck spots the same pair of wings that were on the package on the tailgate of her truck. Chuck walks to the center of the intersection and looks in each direction for a few seconds. He then turns north and his gaze lingers in the direction the woman drove. Leave a like if you enjoy the video, and subscribe for more videos like this.